Okay, so our next presenter is Roger Mason himself. Roger Mason is the founder of the FrancoForum conference. He started the forum in the belief that traditional music from the Francophone world was underrepresented in American ethnomusicology. Mason lived in France for 32 years, where he had a long career as a singer-songwriter. He continues to perform in France today with the bluegrass group The Stringfellows. He recorded 7 LP albums and is the author of Jolie Blonde Aimable Brune, Love Songs from Cajun and Creole Louisiana, published by Les Éditions Tintamarre in Shreveport, Louisiana. Mason taught elementary school general music for 30 years. He holds a PhD in music education from the University of Miami. And to contact him, his email is romason, so ROMASON, at currently, like the adverb, CURRENTLY.com.
Currently.com?
Yeah. Yeah. I'll repeat it. ROMASON at CURRENTLY.com.
Okay, excuse me if I'm reading some of this stuff, but I'm getting old and I don't remember everything. And there's a lot of information about this presentation that I want to make sure I don't forget. So, 45 miles to the south of New Orleans, where the mighty Mississippi flows into the sea, lies a 300-year-old mysterious town called Grand Bayou Indian Village. Its population today is a mere 60 people, but this wasn't always the case. Not so long ago, Grand Bayou was an active fishing village with abundant land and a population of 1,000. Today, rising waters have eroded the land and turned Grand Bayou into a picturesque but semi-abandoned town. The village is now accessible only by water. Its subsistence-based community traces its history back to the origins of the Plaquemine Delta some 1,000 years ago, centuries before Europeans colonized what's now Louisiana. Nearly 1,000 people lived in the village as recently as the 1940s, but as the land got washed away, the community got smaller. Just 15 families remain as full-time residents today, while many return periodically for seasonal and community events. So who lives in Grand Bayou today? And just as important, who once lived there? If the town has been called Grand Bayou Indian Village, it's because it has been and is populated by a mixture of Native American tribes, primarily Atakapa Ishak and Chawasha. But the mixed identity of Grand Bayou goes further than a combination of different indigenous tribes. Grand Bayou's people are Americans, but their blended heritage reveals a triple identity: Native American, African American, and European Caucasian. And in European Caucasian, in the case of Grand Bayou, has meant colonial French. This colonial French identity reflects Plaquemine Parish's share in the colonial history of New Orleans and its surrounding parishes. Grand Bayou's inhabitants, with their triple identity, have often been called the S word, Sabines. Over the past century, the term Sabine has been used to legally deny Louisiana Native Americans federal recognition of their tribe. The argument being that a mixed identity is evidence of a lack of tribal historical continuity. If we examine the past cultural preferences of Grand Bayou, we find that colonial French once ranked high on the scale. Indigeneity came second, with its mixture of tribal affiliations. African American identity, even when it was present, was often rejected. Keep in mind that the term colored, common for centuries in Plaquemine Parish, was applied to blacks and Indians alike. Here's a song that Sasha sang, Estelle. Here, a difference should be pointed out between the colonial French of New Orleans, though, and that of its southwest Louisiana relatives, the Cajuns and Creoles. Grand Bayou French was closer to the French one spoken in New Orleans, a French reinforced by French language Catholic school education. There was a literary component in Grand Bayou French which was absent in many other French-speaking towns in Louisiana. This brings us to the role of an exceptional woman, a Sabine from Grand Bayou, the songstress Alma Treadaway Barthélemy. Alma's enormous repertory of over 120 songs is only known to us thanks to the work of collectors. Harry Oster, Ralph Rinsler, myself, Claudie Marcel Dubois, and Luis Alvarez and Andrew Colkin. Their field recordings can all be found in the archives of the Center for Louisiana Studies here in Lafayette. Here are some things to know about Alma. She spoke no English. She couldn't read or write. She fancied herself French. She once returned her television set because it only spoke English. She drank wine, loved strong coffee, and smoked a pipe. She loved to dance. She loved to cook. One of her favorite dishes was goose with oyster stuffing. She married when she was 17 years old. Her husband, a veteran of World War I, was known by his nickname, Makul. He fought in that war without having the right to be an American citizen. Here are some examples from her vast repertoire from her ties to colonial French culture. First one is the love story and tragedy of Pyramus and Thisbe. These were the Babylonian lovers who inspired Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. They've been the subject of songs and plays for over 20 centuries. In France, the myth inspired many 19th century broadside songs, one of which apparently found its way to Louisiana. Alma Barthélemy, indigenous traditional ballad singer from Grand Bayou, recounts the story before singing a dozen of the 42 verses in this song that her grandmother, who unlike Alma was literate and may have learned from an Épinal broadside sheet. Here then is Alma telling the beginning of the story of Pyramus and Thisbe.
Turn your volume up.
Who we got?
Should be good. Is
All right, I'm sorry.
Volume's up. Volume's up on there.
Is my mic muted? No, it doesn't look like it.
Yeah, you have your volume is all the way up.
Notre maman nous avait montré une complainte. C'était une chante, mais c'était une complainte. J'ai jamais chanté ça pour personne. Mais il y a des mots, je sais, tu sais que je pourrais chanter ça. Mais c'était une complainte d'amour. Il n'y a jamais eu personne comme ces deux quelqu'un-là. Il n'y a jamais eu personne comme ces deux quelqu'un-là. Je vais chanter Pyram et Thisbe. Mais écoute, Thisbe était la fille et Pyram était le garçon. Et c'était les plus beaux de la ville. C'était les deux plus beaux de la ville.
So here is Alma singing the beginning of the lament of Pyramus and Thisbe. And if you have the time, I strongly would suggest that you listen to the whole thing in the archives.
L'amour était unible d'une égale tendresse. Ils étaient si parfaits, l'on disait qu'ils étaient les plus beaux de la ville.
So that's one example. Here's another one. Here, Alma's ties to colonial French culture. This is a pop song in the 18th century. It's called Estelle, and the lyrics were by a well-known author, Florian. If you were here a moment ago, you heard Sasha Massey singing this. Here is the same song with the music by a well-known composer of the time, Cherubini, sung by not Alma this time, but by a French friend of ours, an opera singer in France. But listen to the words. And here's Alma singing the same lyrics. She's changed the melody around, but you'll recognize the lyrics.
Ce matin, dans une brunière, j'allais dénicher ces oiseaux. Lorsqu'un vieux berger en colère, il veut me le dire, ces mots méchants, ton adresse cruelle mériterait que l'on te punirait. J'ai répondu, c'est pour Estelle, le vieux berger, plus rien me dire. J'ai répondu, c'est pour Estelle, le vieux berger, plus rien me dire.
What a story. I mean, this is over 200 years after this song was written, and the most unlikely thing in the world, hearing a song about 18th century Estelle sung in Grand Bayou Indian Village in a French that anybody in the world could understand. Anyway, here's another side of Alma. This time she's singing a traditional French ballad, Dedans de Lion. It was filmed for a television series, The Ends of the Earth.
Chagrin va-t'en vers en colline, va-t'en, chagrin va-t'en vers en colline, va-t'en plus loin, ne reviens plus en moi plus que mon cœur, il ne veut plus de toi. Va-t'en plus loin, ne reviens plus en moi plus que mon cœur, il ne veut plus de toi.
And I'm sorry about those subtitles up there because they're automatic subtitles, and sometimes it's a comedy number to read them. It just means that we need more real people to speak French and maybe a few fewer machines to translate automatically. Alma died in 1980, and sadly, many things indicated that the French tradition she represented was going to die as well. Why did colonial French almost disappear in Grand Bayou? By some standards, abandoning colonial French seemed long overdue. After all, Louisiana hadn't been a French colony for over 200 years. Once upon a time, Louisiana was a third of the United States, so we can measure the decline of French starting from that point. When Louisiana became a state, it was already a lot smaller, and now French is pretty much restricted to Acadiana area of Louisiana. So that gives you an idea of what we're up against. In 1921, the new Louisiana Constitution banned the teaching of French in all public schools and made English the official language of Louisiana. But Catholic schools can continue to teach French through missionaries. Alma's literate grandmother had benefited from this education, but it was not available for Alma. But starting in the 1920s, Catholic missionaries began to be replaced by Methodists and Baptists, and their instruction was in English. This trend has continued today. Alma's own nephew, Reverend Benny Ankar, the volunteer pastor of the Grand Bayou Light Tabernacle Church today, has become a Baptist missionary who left his home in Tennessee after Hurricane Isaac in 2012, and he led a religious revival in Grand Bayou, a religious and community revival because the Hurricane Isaac had destroyed much of the village. His church has become the religious and community center of the village, and this is where a visitor can hear the most music. Here you're going to hear a song in English, and you'll hear the French version of it, which is they continue to sing, but you'll also notice that they're at a loss for words at a certain point.
That's what. Glory, glory, glory. Somebody touch me. Glory, glory, glory. Somebody touch me. Glory, glory, glory. Somebody touch me. I know it was the hand of the Lord.
Now hear the French now.
Quand ça fait chanter, que m'a touché, quand ça fait chanter, que m'a touché, quand ça fait chanter, que m'a touché, in the hand of the Lord. Wallow, wallow.
So before World War I, French had been a source of prestige and pride in Louisiana, but as the century moved on, it became a sign of poverty and a lack of education, and carried with it a sense of shame. And this was true in Grand Bayou, much as it had been in parts of Cajun and Creole Louisiana. The folk revival of the 1960s and 1970s began to instill a sense of pride in the southwest Louisiana of the Cajuns and Creoles. The revival movement may have influenced Alma as well, but it took more time to influence the people, her neighbors in Grand Bayou. Cajuns and Creoles were not the only ones, however, to experience a sense of shame. For many years, shame surrounded Grand Bayou's Native American identity. Systemic discrimination contributed heavily to this, discrimination that had prevented Native Americans from voting until 1924, from attending white public schools until 1954 or later, and from marrying anyone who was not colored until 1967. Native Americans emerged from the Jim Crow era with a strong motivation to achieve education. But since the schools were in English, this meant abandoning French. Perhaps because of progress made in civil rights legislation, however, it was now safer to be a Native American, safer to be colored. Grand Bayou changed its name to Grand Bayou Indian Village. A revival of indigenous identity began to take place. And today, building Indian drums in intertribal workshops has helped foster community spirit and reinforce Native identity. These drums are used regularly in Grand Bayou's English language Baptist religious services. But more than anything else, it's environmental disasters that have threatened not only tradition, but life itself in Grand Bayou. Whether French, English, Catholic, Baptist, Native American, African American, or Sabine, all were equally threatened by oil spills that made shrimping, oyster fishing, and trapping increasingly difficult, by the hurricanes that periodically destroyed much of the village, and by the rising waters that had been ignored for years and forced a neighboring Native American community, the Ile de Jean Charles, to relocate inland. Their inhabitants became American climate refugees. All these things have made living in Grand Bayou less and less attractive. But hope springs eternal. A handful of families are determined to remain in Grand Bayou and resisting abandoning their century-old village. The current Native American revival has given a renewed identity to Grand Bayou's people. And in the interest of reviving the French language, that interest may even be spreading to some of Louisiana's francophone indigenous communities. At present, there are some 35 French immersion schools in Louisiana. One of them, a public French immersion school, is opening in 2023 in Grand Bayou's neighboring indigenous village of Pointe-aux-Chênes. And as the great Yogi Berra said, it ain't over till it's over. Songs and music have a life of their own. If Alma's heritage has been abandoned in Grand Bayou, it's also found new places and people where it may carry on, for language is the DNA of the people. Never underestimate the strength of the oral tradition. Here is Alma, for example, singing a joyful drinking song, à l'honneur du patron.
Boire à la santé de notre aimable société.
And here is 37 years later, Monsieur Eugène, who is 102 years old in this picture, recorded by my wife and myself, singing the same song from memory.
Nous allons boire à la santé, à la santé, à la santé.
De
Nous
notre
allons
aimable
boire
santé.
à la santé de notre aimable société.
And here, far from Grand Bayou in Cajun country, here's Helen Boudreau, the truck driving mama, where she performs Alma's songs that she learned, not from her parents or her family, but from field recordings in university and museum archives. Here's Helen Boudreau singing the same song.
À l'honneur du patron, nous ferons sauter le bouchon. Oh, à l'honneur du patron, nous ferons sauter le bouchon. Nous allons boire à la santé, à la santé, à la santé. Nous allons boire à la santé de notre aimable société.
Certainly this is different from the way Alma and her Grand Bayou community learn these songs. But however they're learned, the songs aren't forgotten, along with the stories they tell and the values they represent. And in France, more and more folk revival musicians like Marion Blanchard and Julien Riolet are covering Alma's songs. Here's Marion singing a little bit.
Rossignol du bois joli, rossignol sauvage, veux-tu donc bien?
And here's Julien singing Trois Jolis Dragons. Both singers sing regularly in the hootenanny that we talked about earlier today of Dominique Maroussian. Let me get Julien here.
Trois jolis dragons revenant de la guerre, trois jolis dragons revenant de la guerre, plan, revenant de la guerre.
So I can't play all the verses here for time, but I need to warn you that it is addictive to get interested in traditional songs because there are sometimes dozens of verses and you'll end up listening to all of them. Here are some conclusions about Alma's tradition and mixed identity. If her musical heritage appears to still be safe because of places like Louisiana and France, despite it having left Grand Bayou, some things really have changed. Her songs travel today, but they don't travel by boat. They travel on the internet. Once her songs were remembered only in the hearts and minds of grandparents, or they were transcribed in standard musical notation. Today, they're available in university and museum archives, like the one that we have here. Once Alma's songs in colonial French were the simple fruits of colonialism. Today, her songs no longer travel just from France to its one-time colony, Louisiana. The roles have been reversed. Alma's interpretations and those of other Louisiana singers have become models for singers in France. And because Alma was of a blended triple identity, she was not easily limited to a single ethnic group. She wasn't entirely white, black, French, Jewish, or Native American, but all those things. She self-identified as a francophone songstress who was born in Grand Bayou Indian Village, but she was first and foremost her own person. New homes for Alma's music reflect the possibilities for interconnection in the francophone world. In Alma's case, a trickle-down colonial transmission has been replaced by a more egalitarian approach, a musical salad bowl nourished by field recordings and mass media. Surprising things may await us still in the world of mixed musical identities and the traditional music. Alma's songs have already traveled from Grand Bayou to France and Cajun Louisiana. Who knows if they might not find a new life elsewhere as well? Thank you.